So Hungarian history is it's really fascinating to me. It's so interesting. And it was interesting as a missionary to be there because you hear people's stories. And I feel like most of the Hungarian history that I have learned comes from the stories of the Hungarians. And then I came home and I would, kind of learned about it more factually and things like that. But it is really interesting. I guess not ancient Hungarians, but the Hungarians came and they settled in the Carpathian Basin toward the end of the 800s. I think it was 1860 something. And so they settled there in the Carpathian Basin, and just interesting tidbits I would hear from the Hungarians. Around the year 1000, there was a king, Stephen, who came to rule, and he was responsible for the Christianization of Hungary there. And it was also during that time that they switched their writing, the language. So the Hungarian language, it used to be written in these kind of symbols. It is really interesting. It's called the Rovírás, and they're just all of these symbols. It looks unlike anything that I'd ever seen before, but it's kind of the ancient Hungarian script. And so they switched from that to the Latin alphabet during that time, and that is where the Hungarian language comes from, or the written language comes from today. It is very much, letters that you would recognize. But the ancient Hungarian script it's really interesting. And I think it would be really hard to write in, but it was really interesting. And then you hear from people about, so at the end of World War I, the official peace treaty, the Treaty of Trianon, it was signed as the official peace agreement at the end of World War I. But in that, the Hungarians lost a lot of the land that was Hungary. It used to be a lot bigger than it is now. I think about 75% of the land that was Hungary was lost, and now it is in Romania and in parts of other countries like that. But a lot of times in Hungary, you see what Hungary was at one point, how big it was, and now it is just, a fraction of the size. It's about the size of Indiana right now. But it's just so interesting to hear about the history from the Hungarians and how they tell it. And I remember also stories from people about what it was like during World War II, and then also during the Soviet occupation of Hungary. And that's something that people lived through. It's not just history to them, something that you study that happened to your great-great-grandparents. It is very much a part of their lives, and it is something that a lot of them lived through. And it's really interesting to hear them talk about it. A lot of them, they were forced to learn Russian in school growing up, because that's what the situation was. And all over Hungary, you see these 10-story buildings that many of them live in. They are these kind of cement, big, square block buildings. They're 10 stories high. There are usually about 4 to 6 different apartments on each floor, and they're just in rows and rows and rows in a lot of the cities. In the first city that I served in, there were just a ton of them. There are also a bunch of factories, and that city, it was once the industrial capital of Hungary during the Soviet occupation of Hungary. And so it is really just incredible to see how many of these buildings there are. And you look out and you see rows and rows and rows, and you think about all the people that live there. You just think, oh my gosh, there are so many people that are fit into these buildings, and people still live in them today. It's a lot less expensive to live in than living in a home separate from a building. But yeah, that's kind of what it looks like today. And you hear people's stories of growing up there and what it was like. And it's interesting to hear a lot of their perspectives, because I always kind of had the perception of, it was such a bad thing. And I think there are a lot of tragic things that have happened. But then it was interesting to hear some people, and they say, okay, well, we have our freedom now. We're not under this communist rule or whatever it is, but we don't economically have a whole lot more. And so it's really interesting, because I think after all of these hard things that have happened in their history, there hasn't been a lot of economic recovery for a lot of the people, and that has influenced their lives. And a lot of times they say, yeah, we're getting by, and it's really sad sometimes to hear a lot of them talk about how they feel about it, because I think once the Soviets left, there wasn't any economic infrastructure to support people, and they were kind of just left to pick up the pieces and move on with their lives. And a lot of them are still experiencing the effects of that. So it's definitely interesting to hear about history from people themselves, and then, to go about and read about it and to research and to learn, in books and on the internet and things like that. And so I've done both. I feel like I've experienced a little bit of both, and it's just a neat experience to hear it from the people themselves. Even though a lot of it is sad, they've been subject to a lot of oppression as a people, but they are such strong people for it, and some of the most incredible people that I've ever met.
One thing that I noticed throughout my mission that was helpful for missionary work and in a cultural setting is just being yourself, being a real person to them, not putting up a front. They're used to a lot of deception, and so when you come talking with them, when you introduce yourself, when you talk about yourself a little bit, it shows them that you care about them, and you care about being yourself with them. And once you do that, once you show that love in that way, they'll reciprocate. They'll show you that love back. Cultural differences, I would say that there's not a lot that are very weird or very different from living in America. It's a little bit harder to talk to people, but once you start talking to them, sometimes they don't stop. Again, they're very focused on the family. They not obsessed, but they love their ancestry. They love the fact that they're Hungarian, and that their fathers were Hungarian, that their fathers were Hungarian. And they have great pride for their country and for their culture. And that was really respectable to see, their patriotism towards their country. Anytime they hear that you're from another country, they just want to tell you facts all about Hungary. Did you know this? Did you know this? Did you know that this Hungarian invented this? Did you know that this was invented in Hungary? I kind of feel the same way now whenever I hear any facts about Hungary. I get so excited. But yeah, they just love their country to pieces. When you go into someone's home, they've invited you, and they just want you to feel as comfortable as possible. Most of the time they won't ask you to take off your shoes, and if you do, they'll provide slippers for you to slip on so your feet don't get too cold. Anything that they offer you, if you accept it, they'll love you forever. If you're kind of hesitant, if they offer you something, I don't know, it's maybe a little bit hurtful to them, and I had to kind of learn that over my mission. If they ask you for seconds, they're overjoyed if you say, yeah, I'll have seconds of that food. But if you're not, you can just say politely, like, I'm pretty full right now, and they'll respect that most of the time. And they'll say kind of straight up when they serve you something, if you don't like it, you don't have to eat it. But they're very accepting in that way. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of cultural differences. Very comfortable setting.
So Hungary definitely has its own culture. They have their own customs and traditions, and they're fun. I like them. One of the big important ones that I needed to get used to was how to formalize the older people in the way that you speak. So with the way that the language works, as you're talking to them, it's not that you're saying you or like directly speaking with this person. It's kind of like a third person thing, like, oh, how is she feeling today? Or like, how does it please you to, or how does it please him to be today, or stuff like that. And so the conjugations of words were very different, and just the way you would approach an older individual, like the senior citizens, it was different, but it was fun. Once I was able to do it, I was intimidated by it at first, like how to do it, because it was just so hard. It was hard to learn how to talk to an individual to begin with, so then to change your grammar, like that just made it harder. But once I got the hang of it, it was fun. I enjoyed it. It was fun to formalize them. Something else that's very unique there is that it's impolite to sniffle. If you have a runny nose, you just have to blow it. If you're in sacrament meeting or on a bus, or I don't know, wherever you are, if you're just having a runny nose, they'll give you a tissue. They'll be like, oh, here, take this, like, get it out. Because it just doesn't make sense to them to try to keep it in if it's trying to come out. It's just like, get it out. And so you'll be in meetings and who knows where, and they blow their noses so well, so loud. So I got really good at that too. So it was weird coming back home to where here at least it's not polite. It's not polite to just pull out a tissue and just blow it, just get it out. Because usually people will step out or they'll just sniffle till later they can get a tissue and take care of it. But yeah, so I had to adjust going there and then adjust coming back because it's just not usually, it's not acceptable here so much. But yeah, so you'd better get used to that. Don't feel self-conscious about blowing your nose in Hungary because everybody does it. Another thing is that they're more cautious or more concerned about freezing, about getting cold or getting sick from being cold. So they don't put ice in their water. They never have ice water. It's very weird if you ask for it. And so I actually got used to having more just lukewarm or just cool water. And even now, I don't like ice in my water. I actually really like not having it. And there's a bit of logic to it as I came to know. It's just like your body's already trying to keep warm as it is. Like the organs are trying to work. So as you're putting that ice water in, it just kind of freezes things up. So in the end, I can see the logic in why they don't drink ice water. But it was interesting. A lot of the missionaries had a hard time with that because they're like, I just want my cold water. And it was interesting sometimes in the summer I remember there were a few times where we'd go meeting with some of our investigators or just tracting, and the people would want to offer us some tea, some hot tea, and it gets so hot in the summer. So sometimes it was just like you dreaded it, or it's like you're already so hot, and then all of a sudden they're like, here, have some tea, like hot tea, and you're just like, and it was good, like fruit tea. So we could have tea as long as it wasn't like the black or white or green tea. So they tried to give us this fruit tea, and it's just like so hot already, but you go with it, you go with the flow, you drink it, but and then just going along with the freezing thing, when it's cold outside, especially in the winter, you don't sit down on any of the benches. It's not acceptable, or like you can. You're not going to go to prison for it or anything, but all the little old nannies and bachies, old men and old women, they'll come up to you and tell you like, don't sit there. You're not going to have children. Like they tell you like you're just going to get sick and you won't be able to have kids. And so. And the same thing went once in the winter. I think I just wore like a simple pair of like skin colored nylons to church, but one of the church members got after me. She was like, you need to be wearing thick stockings. Don't come crying to me when you can't have kids. But like I wasn't offended, but I was just like, bless her heart. Like they really, they don't want to freeze. They don't want to get cold, but can't blame them. I mean, don't want to get sick, but it was just an interesting cultural thing. Like, to not do that, to not go sitting on benches when it's cold outside or things like that. So it was interesting. Oh, yeah.